Well, let's get started then. So this is Matt Thompson with Techos Angels, and along with Ryan Witt, we put on this biotech panel as part of our TCA Tech Tuesday talks, and really excited to have this panel. We've brought together a wonderful panel of VCs, experienced entrepreneurs, lawyers, and accelerator incubator leaders, and there's a lot of overlap between them because you see a lot of people going from entrepreneur to incubator to VC and back. So there's a lot of overlap. So with that, I wanted to have our panelists introduce themselves. So why don't we start with Steph Shea from Biocom.
Great, thanks, Matt and Ryan, thanks for having me. I'm Stephanie C. I am the current executive director of Biocom California's Los Angeles office. I've been in this role for the last 9 months. I've been in the industry for over 30 years now. Starting out as a patent attorney, I've been an angel investor. Before joining Biocom, I served on their LA advisory board, but was CEO of a biotech startup that was founded, grown, still struggling to stay here and stay rooted in LA. And then various roles, both legal and business in industry. So with that, I will turn it over.
Great. Emmett, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you, Matt. So Emmett Cunningham, I'm currently a senior managing director at Blackstone Life Sciences. Blackstone Life Sciences was born out of an acquisition of what used to be called Claris Ventures, which was a dedicated life science venture firm. And currently we do therapeutics investing mostly, but we did do diagnostics and devices when I was at Claris. But again, now we're doing mostly drug development.
Great. Ahmed?
Oh, hi there, this is Ahmed Irani. I'm the president and CEO of the Southern California Biomedical Council, just SoCal Bio for short. We're a trade association for the biotech, medtech, and digital health companies in the greater LA area, LA, Orange County, and the surrounding communities. Council has been around in business for about a couple of decades, and our focus historically and will continue to be supporting emerging companies and providing the necessary resources and helping them build the network that enable them to succeed. In addition to that, we are part of any kind of initiative at the regional level to build the partnerships and create the infrastructure that enable the industry to continue here, adding jobs and contributing to the creation of wealth. And we do also advocacy, but particularly in collaboration with national organizations such as Bio and Advamed. Those who are members of Techos Angels, I know the organization since it started in the late 90s, and those who have been participating in healthcare funding activities know about us, and I always provide courtesy tickets for you guys to attend our annual conference that features a lot of emerging companies, and will continue to do so. And we're thinking about establishing a formal partnership actually with the group before the end of the year.
We've got great events and a number of great panels and great pitch competitions that some of our companies have gone on to, which has had some great attendees. So thanks, Ahmed, for joining.
Thank you.
And Josh?
Josh Baer, co-founder and managing director of Hibiscus Bioventures. So we have two sides to Hibiscus. One is a traditional venture capital fund. First fund is my personal family office. Second fund we're in the process of raising. We mostly focus on therapeutics with some diagnostics. Typically on the fund side, looking to lead seed and Series A rounds. We also have a venture studio, which is building companies from scratch. And we typically work with companies that are within 18 months of IND, and not really earlier than that, and some early clinical companies as well.
And then Ryan, do you want to introduce yourself and then kick off the questions?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, for those who don't know me, I've been a member, my name is Ryan Witt. I've been a member of TCA for almost 4 years now. Background is as a venture-backed digital health operator and also venture-backed therapeutics operator. And then been angel investing for around 6 years. And very excited to be hosting this. I also co-chair Biocom Startup Resources Committee. So that's another activity I do right now. I'm also involved with UCLA Health's biodesign program and their MedTech and digital health innovation hub. So, but excited to be hosting this panel. So kicking it off, I was thinking along the lines of the ecosystem development. Both Ahmed and Steph have been in the LA ecosystem for quite some time, and we've seen it evolve. And I was wondering if you each could share your view of its evolution and where it is. And just to shed some context on this before you answer, we've seen Instill Biosciences go public for over, I think, a $2 billion market cap now. Kite exited Kite Biopharma a few years ago for close to 12 billion or whatnot. Appia out of Caltech just raised over a $50 million Series A less than a month ago. And kind of the fastball question is, is our ecosystem looking less like an uphill battle for companies in biosciences? We've had Amgen in the past, but it's been kind of slow to pick up. And should Josh and Emmett from SF in New Jersey, New York be booking a hotel regularly here? How have you seen it evolve over time, and what should we be looking at?
Go ahead, Ahmed. You've been here longer than I have.
Oh, if you take a look 4 decades back, I mean, we're talking about biotech defined narrowly the right way. We're not including medtech companies in it, and we're not including digital health companies in it. So pure biotech had a tremendous promise in LA when you look at it, 1980s and up till 1985. Any publication covering biotech at the time, when you trying to identify the hotspots, San Francisco, Boston, and LA was considered as one of them because of the creation of companies such as Amgen, International Genetic Engineering, and institutions such as Caltech were spinning off companies and so on. Yet, for a number of reasons, the industry is starting to stall. Companies got acquired, moved out, and tech transfer was not up to bar at all of our universities. Leroy Hood, when I invited him to speak at our conference one day, mentioned a story that kind of sums up one of the big problems that we had historically here about tech transfer. He said that he had a lot of ideas about how to create instruments that would speed up molecular biology research and revolutionized them. He had the idea of creating a peptide synthesizer, a DNA sequencer, and so on and so forth. And he had a conversation with the president of Caltech at the time about all of these ideas and his ambition to create companies. The president of Caltech told them, well, maybe you should focus on research and education rather than dirtying your hand dealing with the private sector, dealing with commercial activities. And if you insist on doing this work, don't expect any kind of help from Caltech. And that's why he ended up creating companies, not in LA, but in the Bay Area. The biggest one was Applied Biosystems, that then get acquired by Agilent, and then Bill Gates created an endowment for him in Seattle, and Leroy ended up moving from Caltech to Seattle until his retirement later. He's 82 years old now. So that shows you one of the biggest problems when it comes to the growth of biotech in LA. You need the partnership with research institutions because they are the sources of innovations. Biotech is heavily science dependent. And if you don't have that conveyor built from the university lab to the marketplace, you're not going to have a biotech cluster that is growing. And up till 1995, you can count the number of biotech companies in LA on one hand. And it included companies like what became now Gilead in San Dimas, Amgen, of course, and One Lambda out of UCLA, a few companies. And then came one of the major changes is the recruitment of David Baltimore to Caltech as president. And he brought with him his team out of Boston that were very experienced in tech transfer. And that really changed the equation, or started to change the equation 180 degrees. And you get more spin-offs out of Caltech. Other institutions started to emulate, and you get some movement in the industry. And from 1995 until now, you get a slow growth. It's like lava moving gradually, but moving forward. So since then, we had a growth of the industry. And right now we calculated about 320 biotech companies between Santa Barbara down to San Clemente in Orange County. The bulk of the industry is about 175 are in LA. And then Orange County about 70, 80, and then 10, 15 in Santa Barbara, and 10, 15 in Ventura County. Riverside, San Bernardino, 4, 5, something like that. So you have a sizable industry. If you lift it and put it in Oklahoma, everybody in Oklahoma goes gaga over it. And it includes Amgen, it includes Kite, it includes Allergan. It includes some of the traditional companies that kind of free in imagining themselves, like what's now Takeda, Grifols, and so on. And a sizable number of employees, maybe 25,000 in total. So if you lift it and put it in another location, you're going to get a lot of excitement about it. Everybody would be writing about it. But this is LA, which is fragmented geographically, fragmented in many ways. And you don't see the industry because it's all over the place geographically. So that's why historically you get that kind of complaint. Why don't we have more biotech? But it is growing, and LA is coming from behind. And it takes a lot of money and time in order to catch with the top 3 markets, which is the Bay Area, Boston, and you can, the third market can be North Carolina or San Diego, depending on how you count the industry. So overall, there is improvement, and then accomplishments like, first company to come up with a CAR-T, FDA approved Kite, companies such as Kythera, which came up with an injection to dissolve the fat tissues. You get a company in sickle cell anemia with a mouse, and you get new company formed and raising a lot of money. The fact that Capsida raises 140 million in a Series A, that was unheard of 5 years ago. But because of the existence of new funds with a lot of money and willing to take the risk, such as Westlake Biopartners, Versant, and also the partnership that these companies have with established companies enable them to do strategic deals. In the case of Capsida would be AbbVie. So we see movement, we see new company formation, tech transfer is improving. We have dedicated funds at the high end and also at the startup end doing biotech deals. I give a lot of credit to Free Flow. Free Flow spun out 7 companies, 4 of them are in biotech, and Appia Bio that was mentioned by Ryan is one of them. They gave it the seed funding last year, and less than a year, they were able to do a Series A, $52 million. That was unheard of 7 years ago. So all of these are good things. In addition to that, you have a lot of incubators that accommodate these companies. Second big problem that LA has is the lack of space to accommodate large concentrations of companies. That is changing, and we're going to see interesting projects popping up. The airport has a plan to develop 100 acres south of it, LAX, and the big component of it is going to be the life sciences. Hopefully this would happen, but there are other projects happening around the county that would accommodate the industry.
So Emmett and Josh, I would tell you to start booking. I joined SoCal Bio because, as Ahmed's pointing out, we're sort of at a tipping point. I don't think we're completely over the hump yet, but we are definitely seeing those pieces come and stick. I mean, Ryan knows I've been saying that all around town. I mean, to Ahmed's point, right, $1.7 billion in NIH funding came into LA County last year. we've been the top of that leaderboard in California State for a really long time. So the innovation, the science has always been here. I think, to Ahmed's point also, there was no way for those innovations to stick and grow in LA County and in the region just generally. So what we're seeing right now is some of that stickiness, all those pieces really coming together at the same time. And that's including sort of government support. So
Stephanie, educate me. I think of Irvine as sort of a device hub, but I don't think I've ever visited or invested in a biotech company in LA or the surrounds. Where's the biotech corridor in LA? Where are those companies?
I would say we're seeing a couple of different clusters, what we call micro clusters popping up, certainly Thousand Oaks and the Westlake region. As Ahmed pointed out, you've got Westlake Village Biopartners who have really sort of laid a stake in the ground. Another one is sort of along what we call the 210 corridor in the San Gabriel Valley, right in between Caltech and City of Hope. And then we're seeing a lot emerge sort of on the west side, and that's sort of dynamic. I'd say Culver City, you see a lot of building going on there. 1200 Pharma just moved out there and they're doing fantastic. And then of course the development at the Lundquist, the Harbor UCLA facility down in Torrance there. And it's got that.
I see the map on there.
To his point, yeah, it's the geography, as one of our local stalwarts here, Rohit at Larda likes to always say, we suffer from the tyranny of geography and that spread. So it's really hard to really concentrate and amplify everybody's voices because we are so spread out. So, but we're seeing that change now. So I would say start booking your hotel rooms, but be strategic about geographically where you do that.
Yeah, I'm not sure where to put it, and they have to have a few of them.
And Josh's secret is he has a motorcycle, so I'll oust him for that one. to weave through the LA traffic, which tends to be one of the biggest challenges. One of the things I know we're doing is we're trying to have some sort of central hubs, but I like to shift this a little bit and bring in Josh and Emmett also into. Part of this goes into your question that you just raised, which is identifying great opportunities. And as investors at TCA, we're always looking to improve our thesis for biotech or for investing in general. And taking investors from biotech and asking each of you, is there a specific kind of archetype, team, and narrative that you found to be indicative of success on average? And are there any deal killers and red flags that us as angels should be wary of? And just to kind of seed your mind, maybe it's kind of smelling out that a CEO may not be willing to step down. Maybe it's, and maybe that may be a red flag, and maybe, positive might be a CEO who worked at, Celgene for 15 years and then went into VC and is starting a company with a Nobel Prize winning laureate, right? So just to kind of seed you, but we'll love to see if maybe we can get some help on our thesis, and maybe there are certain sectors to have our eye on.
Josh, do you want to go first, or should I?
Emmett, please.
Well, the success begets success, right? So it's better if a team has had success and has worked together previously, and by success I mean an exit, either public offering or an acquisition. So that is the best predicate. But I did this analysis recently to look at inflows of capital into biotech. When I started in about 2005, it was under $5 billion total. That's all inflows, debt, equity, partnerships, everything. This year, it's tracking to be closer to $75 billion. So, 15-fold increase in money. And that how many more companies does that mean? Let's just say it's 15 more. It's probably not because it's more expensive, but 10 times as many companies. That's 10 times as many teams. So it's very difficult to find great teams. And the very best teams would rather go to a company that has been de-risked and is ready to do an IPO than all the hard work of company creation and pulling together, pulling things out of tech transfer. So I think that's really important. You have to pay a lot of attention to the team, and do they know what they're doing, and do they have a good track record? And beyond that, there are so many things, so many check boxes to go through when we consider these investments. From the unmet need to the science, the IP related to that. It gets quite complicated, and it really is individualized to almost every opportunity. But I would say great team, great foundational science is a great place to start.
Yep. In addition to that, I'd say strategic thinking around clinical path. Especially with the earlier stage companies, I've seen a lot of companies just kind of follow whatever indication they get grants written for, which I understand if you don't have outside money, but in my experience, the most successful companies have thought about that kind of clinical and commercial strategy from the very beginning as their preclinical, as you're in dogs and pigs and rabbits, thinking about where commercial you actually want to go.
I'll tell you what has been in vogue or hot and what's not been in vogue. And what has been in vogue is genetically defined diseases that have genetically defined models that look like the disease so that you can de-risk the approach in animals effectively and then advance them into humans. And that's the whole rare and orphan disease push that has been around now for a decade. It's also benefited from having very vocal advocacy groups and being less price sensitive on the drug price side. So all that has pushed small and big companies toward that. And the contrary is that the specialty pharma, where it's an incremental benefit, maybe twice daily dosing to once daily dosing, or so slightly more sustained release or slightly better safety. Those things are not very, very appealing these days because there's just very little margin for error if you only have a slight benefit.
And that's helpful. And I guess when, as investors, it may be easy for us to spot a kind of consumer unmet need or an enterprise software unmet need. If you can maybe briefly discuss, what is a clinical unmet need? What does that look like? You have
well, death, blindness, and no treatment that addresses it. It's usually a very clear and important functional outcome, like something like death or vision or ability to walk, hospital stay, and the fact that there is currently no treatment or very few treatment. The treatment that's there is not very good. So ALS, huge unmet need. Dementia, huge unmet need. Many cancers still have a huge unmet need. Many of the rare and orphan diseases because people haven't gone after them, and it's relatively recently that we've understood the genetics and the targets. They all tend to have unmet needs, but again, a disorder that affects 2,000, even though it may be lethal, is very different than a disorder that affects 2 million. So it's always a sort of a balance.
I said it's the unmet needs in the diseases that have no treatment, which are often the highest priority, as well as those that have insufficient treatments. Maybe there's significant tox associated with the therapy, and it gets approved because there's nothing else there, and there's an unmet need in finding something less toxic, or particular therapeutics like in ophthalmology that need to be dosed in the back of the eye once a month, and you're looking for something that's much longer acting as opposed to a month and a half is not going to help. But across the board, I think that's what we're seeing in a lot of advanced therapeutics as well. It's efficacy, and then efficacy, safety, and durability of response kind of are all different categories, at least for me, in terms of unmet need.
That makes sense. Thank you. And moving further into identifying opportunities and even getting into the best opportunities, one of the topics that I mentioned to our angel group often is sometimes one of the Midas list VCs has said often the best deals he's invested in, either nobody wanted to get in or they were clamoring to get in and you had to fight to get in. And turning to that topic of how do you get into these great deals, could you tell us maybe one of your favorite deals, and how can TCA and our members position ourselves so that we're going to get a call from you to participate in your next deal? Because that's something as angels, we want to get that call to put in a little bit of cash on that deal.
So I can jump in. From my perspective, it's focus on the fundamentals. If you're an angel investor, it's a little harder if you don't have a whole analyst team to dig in. But from my perspective, focus on the fundamentals, not necessarily which other funds are already in there. It's if you like the science, if you like the clinical path, if you like the team, then you can invest and just make sure that they're going to have sufficient capital to move forward. Additionally, in terms of getting into the deals, talking to them or talking to management teams early and often and trying to give advice where you can, even if there isn't a deal opportunity for you there, just help. And helping for free will win you a lot of favor. And I've gotten some of my best deals as a result of just helping people along the way and hoping something good comes of it. And then when there's an opportunity, you're the one that's going to get called.
Great. Thanks, Josh. Emmett?
I kind of view it as most difficult, first of all. And it's difficult to come in for any round other than the seed round or the early rounds, because once you get into the bigger money rounds, especially if people are looking to put a lot of money to work, the last thing they want to do is spend a lot of time bringing in $500,000 across 38 people who are going to join that syndicate. So I spent a lot of time working with and going to meetings for the life science angels up here in the Bay Area, and the people who did the best, networked the best. They were close to the serial entrepreneurs who were building those companies. If they had the bandwidth, they became one of those serial entrepreneurs who built those companies. And that means going to the tech transfer offices, asking them what's hot, what companies are being built, looking to raise money, meeting and having lunch and dinner with the people who are bringing the most interesting fundable deals to the group. I'm sure you have dinners or meetings, or used to have dinners, but you will again, where they pitch these deals. And there probably is a half dozen or 12 folks there who everyone recognizes, finds the good deals, brings them forward. So you want to get close to those people and tell them how much you can commit and that you're willing to commit. And by the way, typically these seed rounds are, I think they're typically in the $500 to $2 million range that they're raising, maybe a little more. So, say you can do 250, it's a lot more attractive than to say I have 5,000. Just again, like herding 50 different investors can be challenging.
That makes sense.
And I think locally too, to your point, Emmett, right? Just getting in early, and there's a lot of those opportunities around town and networking and joining groups and programs and different things like, SoCal Bios and Biocom's Capital Development Group. A shameless plug, and Ryan, you're on the committee, so I was going to turn it over to you, because there is opportunity to just sort of, and also if you're not experienced in investing in biotech, right, there's an opportunity to sort of learn from and really gain an understanding of sort of the questions to ask and the things to look out for from some of your neighbors, I'll say.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it goes without saying that having angel groups, and LA has 4, and we are big, and they do a lot of deals every year, but we don't see a lot of the deals done in the biotech space. And it's a function of many things that we're not going to discuss right now. But a way to get into it and identify good deals is, as Stephanie mentioned, we do conferences that focus on very early stage companies, and can give you a window on opportunities to invest in. We even deal with projects that are in formation. So we don't wait until a company gets formed, and we work with the entrepreneur on accumulating the resources needed to create a company. And again, it gives you a window on something that you can come in early on, invest in, help in the seed that enable the company to stand on its own feet. So just more networking with the local groups, and the science is there, the innovations are there. You'll be like the kid in the candy store when you're in LA in terms of identifying a lot of opportunities. But biotech is not everybody's cup of tea.
The reason there isn't much angel investing in biotech is just that $2 or $3 million doesn't get you very far.
Yep.
Yeah,
that's a problem. Yeah.
And I guess carrying that forward, I'm going to pass the baton over to Matt, who's going to touch on kind of financing. So Matt, do you want to take over that question?
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like there's this gap. It's almost like the Venn diagram of angel investing in biotech is challenging just because of the economics and the time frame. But there's been some interesting trends in biotech lately. More IPOs, SPACs. some traditional tech VCs like Andreessen Horowitz getting into Bio Eats the World and biotech investing. So maybe to start with that is, Josh, maybe you talk about the recent IPO that your firm was involved with. Sounds like during the midst of COVID, you're able to take a company public. Maybe talk a minute or two about that, and then maybe we can then shift a little bit more to these alternative financings like SPACs.
Yep, absolutely. And of course, a fly just went into my eye. Yes, so happy to talk about the Neximmune IPO. So Neximmune's a company that got spun out of Hopkins back in 2014 and ran into some financial issues. I'd say that's a great example of, as you said earlier, the companies that have a lot of trouble raising money sometimes can be the best deals. And we had a lot of conviction around the science. We ended up purchasing that company back in 2017 outright with a few other family offices, and led every financing since, and then took it out for an IPO earlier this year. And the stars aligned. Some great investors came in, Baker Brothers, HBM, Fidelity, and we were just thrilled with the outcome. But it's, so part of that is, they love the fundamentals of the story, and that's great. Part of it is, there's a lot of money floating out there, and IPOs were really booming, especially that month. So I'm very grateful for that. But that leads into what you were talking about with the SPACs and alternative financings. I think it's great that there's so much capital out there, of course, to develop new potential therapies for patients with unmet needs, and that's end of the day of our job. However, getting money and then being a public company are two very different things. And running a company is hard. Running a biotech company is really hard, and then running a public biotech company is a whole different animal. And just the shortage of biotech CFOs out there. There are not a lot of them that are available, and you can manage that as a private company. As a public company, it is going to be very, very challenging. So I unfortunately think a lot of these companies are going to have a lot of challenges going forward. But because there are so many SPACs out there, it's everything's kind of getting rushed from the private to public transition. But I wish them the best.
Any thoughts on some of these trends, Emmett, in financing?
I mentioned the most important trend, which is that cash is just flooding into biotechnology and tech, for that matter, and especially during COVID when the traditional economies have slowed down. But even still, as money has sort of gone back into the regular economy, as the world is starting to open up, there's still more in tech and biotech, and a good portion of that has to be here to stay. Even if 50% of it went away, we would still be 6 or 7 times larger as far as cash flows than we were 10, 12 years ago. So it's a lot of money coming in now on this. And that of course is funding the public markets, capital markets. And so I think one major change is that we used to see in 2000, 2005 that the window would literally close. There would be no offerings in biotech. And then it would open and it'd be robust at 10 public offerings. Well, now we have 80. So even if we cut it in half, we're still 40, which is 4 times the most robust market of 15 years ago. So those markets are here to stay. I think SPACs have been historically said to be a sign of a frothy market, and the sheer number of them suggests that the market is a little frothy, but I think they're here to stay too. The number will go up and down, and the very best of them, the best teams will chase the best deals, and they'll find some of them, they'll get out. And so I think it's a great time to be biotech investing. That doesn't mean that for the early stage investor, it's not risky. And so you have to be very careful and cautious.
So TCA actually had one pretty successful biotech exit called Savara. It actually went public relatively quickly. So that was an interesting example. And one thing I noticed is, I think when it became clear there was a change in the administration, I think a lot of healthcare stocks got hit. But then COVID came around, and that sort of like completely changed the dynamic. So I want to talk a little bit about sort of the impact of COVID on biotech. For example, it really put a lot of interest in antivirals. mRNA vaccines really picked up. How did COVID impact angel and venture biotech investing from your various perspectives? Maybe start with Steph.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, Matt, I'll jump in. I think to the region, COVID is actually a bit of a silver lining for us in LA. It's helped us overcome that geographic barrier that we were talking about before in some ways, right? Everybody's used to Zoom. I think the talent pool, you know, some of the issues that we have here, right? The building the awareness, the talent pool, investments in real estate and in the space that our companies need to grow into. All these things sort of contributed. What we're also seeing, I think, from my standpoint in LA, part of the thing that I find exciting here in LA is the life sciences, however we define that, coming to the forefront too. So a lot of other, what I'll call subsectors around traditional biotech popping up too, right? With some of the digital health plays and remote medicines. So I think that there's a lot of learnings, and a lot of things that if we can sort of hold on to some of the positives of COVID, I think it should help our ecosystem for sure.
Ahmed, any thoughts on sort of how COVID's impacted this?
I'm showing here another photo of a map of the COVID DX companies that got EUAs. And there's about maybe 22, 24 of them, but none of them ended up developing a COVID-related product because of venture investing. I mean, obviously, these firms have been around. They had other sources of funding, whether it is SBIRs or other types of government funding. Some of them were publicly traded, such as Fulgent, and they were working on molecular diagnostic technologies and did the pivoting to develop kits that many of them are marketing it right now. Most successful of these, there are established players, of course, like Quest and Siemens and Beckman, but the emerging company that really made it is Fulgent, which was founded in 2016, went public, and then never really generated any net profit. 2020 was the first year that the company made substantial revenues and generated net profits, and that will continue. So, overall, I don't see venture capital firms just because of COVID just pouring money into our regions. Whether you're developing a therapeutic or a diagnostic, it was because you pivoted and you already had resources invested in the company that you used in order to develop a kit or start a vaccine development program, as in the case of Capricor or Iavita. And actually, when COVID hit, investment in the area in general kind of stalled a little bit, and people were concerned about how are we going to do the, due diligence and meeting people. That's impossible, blah, blah, blah. But then the investment activities picked up by the beginning of summer. And last year, 2020, was the biggest year, as I mentioned, in equity investing in our region, with $2 billion that went across the board to biotech, medtech, and digital health. But the biggest winner were digital health companies. And actually, biotech investing declined from 2019, in 2020 by comparison, 2019. Hopefully, it will pick up this year.
It's been interesting. I'm curious, I mean, you mentioned you used to do diagnostics. I think it's kind of the golden age of diagnostics to some degree.
Yes.
Do the panelists think that diagnostics are here to stay? And, you see some shifts with that as well.
Yeah, we do not do diagnostics or devices. And the reason we don't is that it just takes a lot of time and a lot of money to exit those companies. The public markets and the big companies that are the natural acquirers typically wait for revenues, and they want to acquire companies so that they're accretive to their top line, and that just takes a long time. It takes longer than it takes to exit with a drug, and not much less money, frankly. And at the same time, they pay multiples based on revenue, which are not the multiples to the drug acquisition is. So there have been wins in those spaces, but it's very challenging. I think the way that COVID has impacted the most, first and foremost, is that we have these two amazing vaccines that have been introduced and changed what could have been a 5-year event into a 2-year event, at least in the developed world, and ultimately in the developing world. So that's just amazing. And that's produced tremendous afterglow or positive impact for the whole industry. And then at a very specific level, it's highlighted the emergence of nucleotide-based technologies, be it gene therapy or mRNA, as really the next great revolution in biotech. You know, we had small molecules and biologics, and then gene therapy, which was sort of DNA. Now we have RNA. It's coming out. RNA is going to be as big or bigger than the DNA-based therapy. So in all those ways, I think it's impacted very significantly. I have so many companies that have chased either a therapeutic or a diagnostic in COVID, and they either couldn't get their trials done, or they were negative, or I don't think that was a very successful scheme.
I think you raised something you said, Emmett, just sort of toggled something in my brain too, which is just in COVID, just sort of seeing what we can do, and the community seeing what we can do as an industry when we really collaborate with the FDA to get these approvals and get vaccines approved, I think has also been a really interesting dialogue here locally, especially for some of our local electeds and government officials who are sort of like, oh, wow, we're looking for local economic recovery. And okay, how can we sort of keep this rolling, so to speak? So
with what? Go. I don't understand. How can you do economic recovery with?
Oh, we're the second largest industry in the state. And, if you're talking to people around town, there's the industry really been met with suspicion, still is in some communities, see it as elite. And I think there's a new conversation that's happening now, seeing how these medicines can save communities and can save the world literally from a global pandemic. So.
Yes, but the innovations and the medicine that would save lives is going to come from different places, not necessarily. I mean, LA is not a place where you do vaccines.
Well, I had coffee with a vaccine maker just yesterday night, so I hope that changes soon. They're about to raise that Series A and hopefully build out in Torrance. But I know, Matt, you had a question. You wanted to talk about FDA a little bit. Do you want to?
Yeah, Steph, that was a great lead-in. There's this new Alzheimer's drug Biogen just released. There's a little bit of controversy around how it got approved, but just more broadly, these days, the FDA is more or less supportive of biotech. Where is it on the spectrum these days? Is the FDA more of a help or a hindrance to biotechs in 2021? And that may be one people may want to pass on, but.
I mean, just from observation and interacting with the FDA on a number of levels, and sometimes we bring speakers to address our companies here about different issues, it has to be a mutual relationship between the industry and the FDA. There are new technologies that FDA regulators may not be familiar with. Industry has a role to educate them about these technologies. And vice versa, there has to be communication back and forth between the two sides to resolve areas of uncertainties and problems. And I think so far the FDA has been, a good force in regulating the industry. And if there are problems, they immediately took care of them, like when the problem with lateral flow tests for COVID became apparent, and they ended up taking decisive action to protect the public and public health. So overall, it hasn't been a hindrance. They are doing their best in order to accommodate the industry in applying things like artificial intelligence and negotiation with companies about what kind of regulations that would apply in this regard and so on. The Alzheimer's situation was kind of an unfortunate situation, but it's a difficult area, and there hasn't been a lot of progress made in targeting things such as Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. This is actually one of the deep unmet need areas that Emmett touched on in his introduction.
Well, I'm a fan, Matt. I think the FDA is an amazing organization in many, many ways. It has all its inefficiencies of any big group
Yep.
of people, but it's when you consider what they have to do, what they're tasked with doing, it's really incredible what they get done. Actually, I know they've responded quickly and effectively to this pandemic. I would not expect that to translate into much more rapid approval time for all other indications. I think this was a very special circumstance. Now, there will be flexibility. Obviously, when the unmet need is massive, as it is in Alzheimer's, they will be a little more lenient on the efficacy signal. It doesn't need to be as strong. Is that a good or a bad thing? I think as long as it's not hurting patients, and this class of drugs does cause some brain edema, but that seems to be manageable with dose reduction. And remember, it's a huge unmet need with it's a lethal disease. It does kill people. And that will promote some continued research and development in the area if people see that there's some hope to take drugs forward in it. So I'm hopeful that by the time I'm 70, we have a few good drugs for Alzheimer's disease. Great.
I wanted to open up to some questions from the audience. First one, I think is good for Steph and for the group. What's the importance of IP for biotech companies? I know you're a former patent attorney.
Totally biased. You know that, Matt.
you know a lot of it, and then you moved on. So, I mean, can you even have a biotech company without patents?
I mean, this is actually a nice, from the FDA conversation, I would actually just add that I think that there's some other regulatory challenges, sort of headwinds headed our way in biotech, right? When you think about proposed legislation, HR3 and drug pricing, and now the TRIPS IP waiver, right? So the IP is key in my mind. It's important to this industry, and you see all sorts of regulations that have been designed to sort of help support that. So it's and we're seeing some of it anecdotally in conversations also around town. So to biotech, it's definitely an important part of the equation. So
yep, IP and people.
Does anyone want to dispute the IP? I see no takers. Yeah, go ahead.
Not entirely biased or out on a limb there, huh?
I think a part of it though is, how much of the portfolio you need to build out? Do you need to have patents in every single country when you're in phase one? Like, when do you build out? Because it is expensive.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, Matt. Like, I think for me, having the JD and the patent experience, but then also coming from, the business world and having the MBA, right? It is balancing that trade-off. I think, and also, just filing new patents on new technologies, especially if you have a platform. I think it's really important to set your strategy from the beginning and really understand where you're headed with the technology, where the greatest commercial application of the technology is. Don't just get too enamored by the newest bell and whistle to your technology, right? Like, really think about how am I going to use this? How am I going to enforce this also sort of down the line?
So Matt, when I started biotech investing, it used to be said that the potential revenue per product needed to be about 300 million to make it worth the cost and time to develop the drug. And that's at least double now. And the higher the better, because again, there are delays, there are increased costs. So $1 billion is even better than $500 million. And once you're talking about products that have that revenue potential, the patent costs aren't really the issue. It's the risk of the development and how likely it is to work. So you should, if you have something that's $1 billion product, you should patent it broadly, Asia, Europe, US.
That patent question sort of leads into the other question from Amit, which was, he was saying in 2020, the top 8 of the top 10 biotech IPOs were from China and Hong Kong. And there are funds that just focus on Asia. And then there's something interesting with China. I think sometimes the patents are a little bit different between China and the rest of the world. But any thoughts on that in terms of where the dollars are going, US versus rest of the world versus China?
China's VC market is exploding. There's lots of money in China to invest in biotech. And they are taking companies public. They almost are always multi-product companies because the Chinese do not like the single binary risk company. And it's frothy. It's a frothy market. They get very high value valuations with relatively early development stage assets. But nothing is hit the fan yet, so the train rolls on.
How do you think about, earlier in our conversation, we talked about the need for academia to really play in for research leading into good drugs in the industry. China doesn't really have that infrastructure in place for solid academia, and their playbook is the me too or me better now. And then going forward, they might maybe have more novel therapies. Are you looking into that at all, or are you just kind of staying local?
There are some Chinese companies that are looking to be the 7th generation checkpoint inhibitor and then re-enter the US for a cheaper cost, but that's the exception. Most that what they're doing is getting Chinese or Asian rights to very novel drugs in the US, and they're focusing on large impact products, so preventing death, preventing blindness, not lifestyle stuff typically. And there is a market for all that among the wealthy Chinese, which is about a third to 25% of that country. And it's not going to generate the revenues that they can be generated here, but there's a lot of unmet need for that, and the government supporting it and investors are bringing that stuff in. Almost all my companies that have late stage assets are approached by a half a dozen to a dozen Chinese companies to bring it into China.
And that's really appealing for for all kinds of companies, but especially earlier stage clinical companies, at least that I'm involved in. As Emma just said, we get approached a lot for each of these companies for often, $10 to $20 million upfronts for China rights, and for a little company that's struggling to put together capital for a clinical trial, that is a really, really big deal, especially as it's at least not diluted from the equity side. So it can be very attractive, but there are, of course, a lot of considerations. The greatest of which is, who is the person, what is the team on the other side of the table that that you're getting involved with. I'd say in my recent experience, there's been a huge amount of progress in terms of the quality of investors coming from mainland China. I'd say, probably 6 years ago, the number of straight equity investors that legitimately just want to make investments into companies was pretty small, at least that I interacted with. But that's changed significantly, and there are some major players there. I think Hill House kind of paved the way for a lot of funds, and they've come in and have become a really legitimate player that's making a big impact in the U.S. and in China. So it's great to see.
Well, the other point is that for four decades, the very best of China, India, Taiwan have been coming to the U.S. to study and staying and becoming really world-class drug developers, and a lot of them are going back. And so that talent is all now relocated back because they want to go home in some instances, and they're chasing the rewards of the opportunity, which are significant.
So we have another question from Rong, who's Rong Wang, who's basically asking, we talked about great teams. It's great to have All-Star who's already taken 2 companies public, but if it's a younger, less known founder, academic scientist, how can they get attention? How can they raise capital?
A very involved, seasoned board. Doesn't cost you any money. It's, find someone that has real credibility in the space, that really believes in the science, will actually put the time in to help you with strategy, at least my perspective, with strategy and fundraising, and make sure they understand the expectation that you have in terms of fundraising. But if they get that person involved, and as an angel investor, don't be shy about recommending those people. If you know someone that would be the right fit, this is how you get those rounds. This is how you get into those early stage rounds. Help them with your network, because especially those early stage founders, they, maybe they will be the next, CEO of a unicorn type thing, but it's all about the network. Having the right mentor with them makes a big difference.
And having a Nobel Prize in biochemistry doesn't mean you know how to build a company. And so they need to partner with someone who's been around the track. Maybe it's a former academic who's been in industry for 20 years. And that team can then present a cogent story to investors. It's very hard for a scientist who has no industry experience. So that, you ask them, what's the IP position? I don't know. You know, it's how are you going to formulate it? I don't know. It's just they have to have the answers to the questions and have built at least a detailed slide deck, if not a written business plan.
So we're coming up on our time. I just wanted to mention one thing. So Techos Angels is was the largest angel group in the nation and quite active. I think in some, in some quarters, we're like the most active investment group in the country, including a lot of major VCs, smaller checks, but very active. And we have a sidecar fund where we can invest directly as well. So if you have interesting companies that come to you looking for angel rounds, please reach out to us. We'd love to get them in our pipeline and love to perhaps be one of their first angel checks, because we like the sector. But most of what we're seeing now is digital health, e-commerce, those kind of businesses. But we'd love to see more biotech. I'm sure you're getting approached by companies that are too early for Josh or for Emmett, but we'd be happy to talk to them.
Yeah, I studied at Johns Hopkins, and I go back twice a year and work with the tech transfer office. Tech transfer is a very efficient way to get a view into what companies are being created and which investigators want to create companies. So take your tech transfer first to lunch, and it's a good way to spend an afternoon.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Everyone, I'd really like to thank people for joining. I thought this was I've learned a lot, and great to bring the community together to hear about the different groups and the different investors in the ecosystem. So thanks for everyone for joining, and have a nice night.
Thank you.
Thank you.